Hi everyone, and welcome to EDU597 Gender and Educational Leadership. My name is Janice Wallace, and I'm going to be your instructor in this course over the next few weeks. It's going to be a busy time, and I'm going to talk about that more and how our course is organized in the next short video that'll be in this same section of eClass. But in this video, I'd like to just introduce myself a little bit, talk a bit about things that are of interest to me, as well as some things around my research, and a little bit about what I've been up to over the last several years of my career and how that might relate to the course that you're going to be taking. I began teaching in elementary. I've taught right up to right up to the end of grade 4 while I was teaching in London, Ontario, and then I moved to Toronto and I taught grade 1 all of the time that I was there. I was in a brand new school. It was lots of fun because it was very unique kind of architectural design, and we had some interesting times kind of, working together to maximize the potential of that architectural design. And so I spent several years teaching in London, was back in, Toronto, was back in London for a couple of years. And then we moved to the United States. And during that time that we were in the States, I wasn't able to teach in a formal setting. So I did a lot of working with people kind of who were teaching in informal settings and needed to know a lot more about how to teach effectively and that sort of thing, and just kind of volunteered my time doing that sort of teaching. And it was really interesting. When I moved back to Canada from the United States, I moved back on my own with my 2 children, and I had 2 children to take care of and to raise and to provide for and so on. So I wanted to get back to teaching, and because that was my first love in terms of my career, that's for sure. And but it was a time when there just weren't any teaching jobs. There was a kind of a glut of people who had been trained to be teachers out in the field looking for jobs, and all the jobs were taken by the time I moved back. And so despite having friends in the system who were trying to find me something, and, knew me and knew the kind of work that I could do, it just wasn't happening. And so I was getting a little frustrated, and, I worked in a bookstore. That was interesting, but it wasn't what I wanted to be doing and that sort of thing. So in talking to a friend at a kind of coffee clutch sort of thing, she mentioned that her husband was a superintendent with the Department of Indian Affairs Education branch, and that they might be looking for teachers in Indigenous schools. And I thought, that'd be interesting. I knew, as most teachers at that time did, I knew nothing about Indigenous education. I knew very little about Indigenous peoples in Canada. I certainly in the district, in the area where I lived, I knew very little. But I was kind of desperate for a job. And so it was not the ideal situation when I went into teaching in an Indigenous school. And I regret that in so many ways, because there would have been so much time saved and a better job done right from the beginning had I had the kind of knowledge that so many of you do now, because there is a growing awareness around these issues. Is it enough? Probably not. Certainly not. But it's certainly better than it was then, because it was, at that time, it was nothing. So I got a job in a small community, a small Indigenous community. It was actually across the river from another Indigenous community, about 30 minutes outside of London, Ontario, which is where I was living at the time. And so I began my teaching career in Indigenous education. And needless to say, when I, taught as I always had successfully, it didn't go very far. It didn't work very well. And so I was puzzled, and I knew I wasn't doing the job I wanted to do for these children that I really fell in love with almost instantly. And so I wanted to know more. And so I talked to a lot of people in the community who were very generous in sharing ideas and sharing what they wanted out of the education system. I did a lot of reading, and then I began taking university courses. I'd done 1 year of university at that point before taking this job. But I wanted to continue with my coursework, of course, and get my degree. Because I began teaching when, if you had grade 13 in Ontario, all you needed was 1 year teacher's college. And that's all that I had when I began teaching. Goodness. Anyway, so I wanted to take courses, and I took as many as I could around Indigenous issues, Indigenous education, and so on. And so began, my educational journey, learning more. And over time, my practices began to change. We had lots of discussion within the building, because there were a lot of us, non-Indigenous teachers who were teaching in the school. We were sharing ideas, we were sharing them with the community, and so on. And so it was kind of an exciting time in a way, as we did what we should have been doing for a very long time. But we were, really trying to improve our practices and working with Indigenous teachers and community members in doing that. At any rate, so I had decided that I wanted to take a sabbatical year to upgrade my knowledge base. And so I had applied to the Department of Indian Affairs. It had been approved. I had been accepted into the master's program at the University of Western Ontario, which is what it was called at the time, now called Western. And I remember my first day of being in the building, and I was in the cafeteria grabbing something to eat before my evening class. And Dr. Rebecca Coulter, who was, I didn't know, but was one of the professors in the building, and a highly regarded one at that, was walking behind me. And we got talking, and she said, "Oh yes, I remember your application. It's an interesting one. She said, maybe you'll be like me and you'll just never leave." And I thought, ha ha ha, of course. My plan was to take that year, finish my coursework, and then do my research project while I was teaching full time. And as it turned out, she was she was very prescient, because of course that's exactly what happened. By the end of that year, I had decided that I wanted to do a thesis. I really wanted to dive deeply into what I was looking at. What I was looking at was how Indigenous and non-Indigenous educators worked together and made decisions together. And I came from that perspective because in the school where I had been teaching, we had an agreement with the London Board of Education, and their consultants came out and worked with us and so on, and helped us develop skills. We helped them develop knowledge base around Indigenous education as well. And so we had this reciprocal arrangement for 2 or 3 of the years that I had been in the school. And so I wanted to know more about that kind of, I apologize, that kind of interaction. And so that's what I looked at, was how Indigenous educators worked with non-Indigenous administrators, and I was looking at the administrative level. So Indigenous administrators and non-Indigenous administrators, and how across systems that worked. And I developed a conceptual framework and so on. And it was a really satisfying piece of work. I really felt that I had come to grips with something that I needed to in my own work. But I began to realize too that work about Indigenous education needed to be done by Indigenous scholars, and my questions needed to be around something that I was experiencing. And what I had experienced was issues around gender, particularly in the university setting, interestingly enough. And so that became a real interest of mine. I had colleagues in the building, professors in the building, including Rebecca Coulter, who became real mentors around these issues, suggesting readings and that sort of thing. And I decided to do my doctoral work in that area. So I applied to the University of Toronto at OISE and was accepted, was given some scholarships so that I could do it. And so I was grateful for that. And I went back and forth. I was teaching in London, and I was also doing research work and that sort of thing, and getting some support at OISE as well. And so that made it possible for me to do my doctoral work. And it was a great experience because I had wonderful intellectual or academic families at two universities. So I had lots of people that I could go to talk to about the kinds of things that I was interested in. So I was very lucky in that sense. So I completed my PhD. And by that time, I had been hired at Western as a tenure track professor, and sort of continued doing what I've been doing all along, only more of it, and working with students at at a much greater level. And that is, I was working with a lot that were also doing their master's thesis and that sort of thing. And it was a great time of change and growth, and I was thoroughly enjoying myself. But my children had both moved west by that point and were encouraging me to think about doing so as well. In the meantime, a friend of mine at the University of Alberta, with whom I shared interests around research in gender and gender equity and educational organizations, was retiring and got in touch with me and said, "Why don't you consider coming to the University of Alberta? I think it might be a good fit." And so I and others applied for a position that came up, and lo and behold, I got the position, and I was moving to Edmonton, a city I knew almost nothing about, other than a conference that I had attended at in Edmonton one June, and liked it a lot. I happened to buy a little house, one of the bubble houses. If you live in Edmonton, you know what I mean, on 102nd Avenue. And, it happened to be close to the university. I wasn't even sure where it was in relation to the university. It all kind of well worked out. And off I went to teach in Edmonton. It was colder. It was drier, much drier, but it was a great experience, and I learned a lot, met a lot of people, and for a while worked in the educational policy studies. That was my home department. For a few of those years that I was at the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Education, I was also Associate Dean of Undergraduate Student Services, and my primary area was program renewal, and that was a fascinating experience as well. So I've been really, really fortunate over the years in having these really interesting experiences as a teacher, as a learner, as someone who has an opportunity to work with people from all over the world, actually, and visit other universities and teach there, and all kinds of interesting things. So it's been a great experience, one that I had never expected. I sometimes tell my students I'm the surprise professor, because this certainly isn't what my plan was when I was 21. But it's turned out to be a wonderful plan, as it's much to my surprise. So that's sort of a little bit about me and the kind of research that I'm interested in. I'll talk more about that during the course as well. And in terms of the course itself and how it's organized, basically my organizing principle is that the course should be helpful to an administrator or a leader in a school or a workplace of some kind, in thinking about how gender shapes practices in that organization, how those practices may benefit or may in fact harm people within that environment, or limit opportunities, those sorts of things. And how is it that as leaders we can make our workplaces more equitable around gender and gender issues. And that includes for our students, for our fellow teachers, leaders, everybody that we work with in workplace environments. So I hope that tells you a little bit about me. I'm really looking forward to working with you and getting to know you better during the course. And for those, particularly for those of you who are perhaps just starting your program, you'll find the next video will be very helpful to you in terms of getting to know where things are on our website, on our eClass page. And even if you have taken a course, this little video will show you where things are, tell you a little bit about what you need to do in preparation for the course, that sort of thing. So that if you choose to watch the other video that's also listed in this section of eClass, I think it will be helpful to all of you. I hope this is helpful in getting to know me, so that when you have an issue, when you have a question, when you have a problem, you'll feel that you can come to me. You'll know a little bit about me, and you'll feel comfortable coming to me and talking to me about whatever that may happen to be. And we can do that in lots of ways. We can do it by email. We can do it through a Zoom call, or whatever way works for both of us. So I look forward to all of that, and all the best in the course, all the best in whatever your endeavors are during the course, and I hope that we have a great time together. I know that we will. Take care.